Good evening, everyone. My name is Thane Rosenbaum. I'm the creative director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society at Touro College. And welcome to the FOLCS Conversation series. Tonight, we have Heroes of COVID-19, four individuals who have demonstrated extraordinary personal resources and initiative and entrepreneurship, and yes, even civic duty in creating organizations or retrofitting organizations they had already headed in a way to help out their fellow human beings while we're all struggling with COVID-19. They're all enormously interesting and we're appreciative to have them here. We have functioned throughout COVID-19, as you know. This is probably our 20th some odd event, and we haven't even charged for the community. So we too have tried to do our part, but there are so many people out there who have really dedicated themselves to helping others during this time of crisis, in this public health crisis. And we thought it would be a good idea to devote one of our conversations to that. So with us tonight, we have Shelley Tagilski, who is the founder of Pandemic of Love. It's a grassroots community-based organization that unites families in need with volunteers. We have Eric Bruner Yang, a very well-known distinguished chef, but he's also the founder of an organization called Power of 10, which supports restaurants and also provides food for the needy. Keisha Dimbo, who is a senior vice president of First Book, which is an organization dedicated to providing equity in education and resources for children in underserved communities. And Josh Pugh, the founder of America Josh, there's a nifty name, an online network for expatriates living in New York City. So we'll be talking to him in a moment. If you're watching us live on Facebook, we're so happy that you're doing that. Our audience continues to grow on Facebook, and thank you. While you're on Facebook, why don't you just like us? Hopefully many of you, this is not your first time. And if we don't have your email address, come to folks.org. And sign up for our mailing list so you'll have advance notice of our events. If you have a question for one of our four guests, either Shelley or Eric or Keisha or Josh, you can leave that in the Q&A box, and hopefully there'll be some time to ask those questions. And on the chat box, there's all kinds of links that are connected to their organization. So if you want to know more about them and what they're doing, the chat box will have that information. So let's start. Welcome all of you. Welcome to this very special FOLCS conversation. Shelley and Keisha and Eric and Josh, thank you. Let's just start off briefly. Are you all four natural crusaders? I mean, is this something in your blood, even from childhood, that rescue is something that mattered to you? And that's one of the reasons you've chosen to do what you do. It's important to make the distinction. Two of the organizations existed before the pandemic and have been retrofitted. I think that's Keisha's first book, right? And also Shelley's Pandemic of Love. Actually, Josh, yours also existed before, right? I think so.
It did.
Right?
Yeah,
also existed before. So I'm just wondering, what mobilized you? What moved each of you to either create these organizations in connection with COVID-19 or adapt them to the special needs of COVID-19? Shelley, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So my organization actually started like at the beginning of the pandemic on March 14th, but my activism and my will to run into a fire with buckets of water if I survive the fire. That's really the image, right? I think that there's two types of people in the world. There are those that kind of like say like, woof, thank God I survived, and they like run away as far away as they can from the fire. And there are those that like survive the fire and then say, I need to grab buckets and go back in and save the people that, you know, that need help. And so I've always kind of had that ingrained in me since a very young age. I started being an activist when I was 12, actually like knocking door to door, getting money to save the whales for with Greenpeace. And also, growing up in a traditionally Jewish household, tikkun olam, which literally means repairing the world, was a very big tenet and pillar of what we were taught as children.
Great. Eric, how about you? You're a chef. You give a lot of orders. People say, "Chef," I know this, that you're always telling them what to do, and they're scared to hell that you're like going to yell at them or something. So did you have to change dramatically here to become Eric Bruner Yang, rescuer of restaurants and people in need of food?
Well, I think that small businesses and restaurants in America in general are some of the most charitable people. We're always donating to other people's causes, cooking for events for large organizations, to schools, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that it's just very natural for if a neighborhood restaurant that's trying to integrate itself into its community to be participating in charitable activities. And
Eric, I don't know if this is widely known. I don't know if anyone agrees with that. I don't know if it's widely known that restaurants are known historically for stepping in cases of crisis to provide food for the needy.
Well, I think the nature of a restaurant is to serve its community in general, right? But it happens to be a transactional form. But pre-COVID, I think restaurants in general have always provided charitable support to other organizations. What happened with the Power of 10 was really first the idea of what did I need to do to save my own businesses? And then really recognizing that, if I was the only restaurant standing in a strip of small businesses, what would be the point of staying in business? So that's really how that kind of, materialized into what we do today. And then will kind of carries us over and helps us kind of focus on our mission, moving forward.
Keisha, and you?
Yeah, so I am a pastor's kid. So my dad is a preacher and my mom's a social worker. So I was raised to be of service. I have not been working in nonprofits all my career. I've drifted between for-profit and not-for-profit over my career. It actually joined First Book, which is just about 30 years old. So they've been around for a long time, at the very early part of the pandemic. So I, in Shelley's words, kind of ran into the raging fire with an organization that really had turned itself on its axis to make things work for the educators we serve. So for me, this is an awesome opportunity to make a difference, to make an impact, to really, really make change in the lives of kids. So I'm really excited and feel quite blessed to be able to be at First Book right now.
Josh, extending a hand to fellow foreigners, something that is natural to you.
I think, similar to Eric, what Eric was talking about, I had questions for myself and I wanted to find the answers to those things. So it began as a necessity to find the answers to things. And especially as COVID began, there suddenly were a lot more questions popping up for, life abroad and being apart from family and friends and the normal networks that you're kind of used to. So it started as that, and then realizing that, it's how America Josh started in the first place, but realizing that there were lots of people out there that had the same questions, that were removed from their own networks, were removed from their own families, and they were struggling as well. And I realized quickly that if you, publish all the things that you've spent a day learning for yourself, you can help a number of other people very quickly. And it doesn't take all that much work to get that information out there and make other people sort of calm them down and give them some knowledge. Because sort of going through something together is, even if neither of you have the answers, it's still just fantastic to know that there's someone out there that is going through the same thing that you're going through. And yeah, it quickly evolves into suddenly questions are coming in and it changes, the community changes you as opposed to you trying to direct it.
So let's go around that group again with another question, and then we'll get to specific things, and then we'll move the questions around again. In light of COVID-19, have there been any particularly special challenges that were unique to what you normally do or what you intended to accomplish with these organizations? It's a good way to sort of give the audience a flavor of what it is you're doing and why you're doing it in this particular instance that's so unique, because this is just unlike, later on I might try to talk about, all of you might not have been in New York in 9/11, I was, but we could have done something like this in 9/11. It said Heroes of 9/11. But those presented a completely different set of challenges, right? So what is it that your organization does or that you do so interesting, so well? Shelley's been running into fires with pails of water anyway, but she's got to do it in a different way for COVID. So maybe you can give the audience a flavor of that.
Sure. So Pandemic of Love is a mutual aid community, but it's global. I actually originally just started it for my meditation community in South Florida. I'm a full-time trauma-informed mindfulness teacher. Pre-COVID, I was primarily working with communities affected by gun violence and mass shootings, and also working with my local community in South Florida. And I started to see the bubblings up of fear and despair as we were moving into sheltering in home around mid-March. And I know a lot of these individuals in my community who are, restaurant workers and, single moms and rely really heavily on tips and hourly wages. And so they were very concerned about basic things at that time, like, how am I going to fill the fridge to feed my kids? How am I going to keep the lights on? Nobody knew how long this was really going to last. And so I proceeded to just put together 2 very simple forms. I'm not a technically savvy person at all. And I went to Google Forms and I created a form that said give help and a form that said get help. And Pandemic of Love was not even a concept at the time. It was just 2 links, 2 forms for my personal community, right, in South Florida. And I posted those links on my social media and went to bed. And the next morning when I woke up, much to my surprise, those forms actually went viral because they were shared by influencers like Maria Shriver and Kristen Bell and Deborah Messing and so on. And suddenly there were thousands of forms on both sides. And so I recruited a bunch of my friends and people that I knew to be volunteers to help match people to each other. Okay, so you need groceries, great. This person is willing to give you a grocery gift card. You need your light bill paid, great. This person's willing to do that. And I wound up creating, basically we're matchmakers. That's what we are. The beautiful thing, yeah, we make shidduchs. So there's like a Yiddish word for you New Yorkers. But really the beautiful thing about Pandemic of Love and what we've managed to accomplish since March is a couple of things. The first is that in order for the transaction to occur, there needs to be human connection that takes place, meaning that the donor must connect by email, by phone, by text to the person in need. The transaction happens directly. Pandemic of Love, we're not a nonprofit organization. We are not a 501c3. We're a nonprofit disruptor. So there's no middleman. There's no overhead. We actually just connect the person who needs something with the person who wants something. And the really beautiful byproduct of it is that the human connections that have formed have created true friendships that are really outside of the norm of what the types of people that people would normally interact with, or like me.
So it has the paradox that its origins is filling out a form, right? And
just
that
filling out a form.
Right,
Yeah.
the form somehow, and we'll talk more about this in other questions I had for you, but that's sort of the paradox, right? That you would think nothing more bureaucratic is filling out a form, right? And yet somehow filling out a form, because of the way you set it up, creates community and friendships and actually, and human encounters. Eric? How about you?
So we started the Power of 10 on March 26th of this year. Most cities in America were shut down, a hard lockdown around March 15th, March 16th. And the concept of the Power of 10 is pretty simple. We try to raise $10,000 a week to help create and sustain 10 full-time jobs and service 1,000 free meals in any community in America. And what originally kind of was the catalyst was we got the numbers first off just by figuring out what I needed to do for my own restaurants to kind of stay afloat for as long as possible. But also we had originally intended it to be this kind of open forum, shared platform of just an idea of the Power of 10, because you would see all these restaurants, they'd have all these GoFundMes for their staff, and different little quick fundraisers to try to keep their business afloat, but none of them were really long-term or sustainable. They were just kind of quick band-aids for what what we see now is still an ongoing situation. But we realized that, trying to have conversations with small business owners at the time about what this idea of Power of 10, they just weren't in the right frame of mind. They didn't have the time to deal with it. They had their own issues. And so we really needed to put the really just proof of concept and put the idea to work. So we started raising the funds and then connecting the restaurants with people that were reaching out for meals, and it happened very quickly. So within the pandemic shutting down and 14 days, we were out delivering meals across Maryland, Virginia, DC, having 8 or so local restaurants participating. And it felt good. We were moving faster than any state or local government in aid. We continued to help businesses that weren't able to receive PPP or EIDL loans. And I think that is the power of grassroots organizations, or as Shelley puts it, nonprofit disruptors. It's just that when things like this happen, there's no time to figure out what the rules are. Hunger and poverty, people's needs, pandemics, they don't have time for bureaucratic paperwork, and the things just need to happen. So that's what we did, and we just keep on rocking.
So that was very well said. So I'm curious, so just to be clear, in the context of Power of 10, the funding is somehow generated, and we'll talk about who creates that? Where's that funding? Because you're saying once the funding source arises, then it's used in the way you would think conventionally it works. The restaurant is being paid to make the food, and right, so that's what they do. And the food, of course, needs to be eaten by somebody. So it gets delivered to the persons who need the food, right?
Right.
So it really matches both sides of the restaurant transaction, right, by creating funds in the middle, right? So how does that get generated? You figured it out yourself in order to demonstrate the business model through your own restaurants, but nationwide, how does that work?
So it really relies on, I'm very blessed, at least in this region, I have a very large platform and reach. And instead of focusing on everything that I could be doing at this time on my own energy, was about just creating enough synergy for others who don't have that same type of outreach or platform. And I've opened several businesses on my own, and that requires someone to be able to raise money. So I've raised money before, I can raise money. That's probably the hardest part traditionally of a nonprofit, is getting the funds. Well, I've opened small businesses, so I know let's call everybody that I know. Let's go through the entire reservation book. Let's hit up everybody possible. Let's set up a Square store.
You were literally reaching out to people that eat in your restaurants.
Yeah, and sending out email lists, Instagram. At the time I was on like IG Live every day, and so it really just started kind of with the Bernie Sanders model, which is get 1,000 people to donate $1, and the more money you keep in your own community, the more power and reach and wealth it creates, right? And so that's where we started, and then as you get steamrolled, you start getting some articles written. Then you can go to the Capital One or this foundation and that foundation. And when you get one, rich people like to be associated with other rich people, either to be frank. And so it's like, oh, Joan, I heard Joan just donated to this organization. Oh, tell me about it. And it just starts to kind of snowball, and you just have to you can't stop. And so that's what happened. So I think what Shelley and I are doing aren't much different. I'm just saying, I know person A may not have the time, person B may not have the time. So I'll take you from beginning to end.
No, I sensed the same thing. It was odd. I don't think I made the connection until now that you and Shelley are oddly in the same business, that you figured out ways to connect people who each have needs or desires to help. And both of you had resources, talent in actually doing that kind of work to actually generate the critical mass. So Keisha, your area of first book is something that is on everyone's mind. Education, right? This is now the second event. Our producer Olivia might remember, or maybe our third event. We've done events already that are dedicated to education. So you're in that. It's a hot spot. So tell us how First Book had to adapt to COVID needs.
Yeah, it is a hot spot, and it's because it affects every single aspect of anyone who's related to anyone who is being or providing education. Even those of us who are parents who were not education providers are struggling to do it even now. The community that we serve, though, is educators who support kids in need. So these are kids who are living in poverty all over the United States and Canada. And even before the pandemic, you had a community of kids who were coming to school without their basic needs met. In a lot of cases, they may not have sufficient food, so they were eating lunch. They were being provided lunch and sometimes all their meals at school. Many of them didn't have books. There's this phrase that we call book deserts, where in some communities you might have one book for 300 kids, and we're talking, real books, which is pretty horrifying. In more affluent neighborhoods, you might have 3 to 8, 10, 50 books per kid. So we were already in that kind of environment. And the way that First Book works is that we have this network of, at the time, around 475,000 educators who serve kids in need. So we distributed resources, wonderful, high quality, diverse books to educators who then were able to provide those to their kids, both in school, and they would get them and send them home with the kids. So kids would have their own brand new, wonderful books. So that was our model. When kids were sent home and teachers were sent home, our model was completely disrupted, because educators were no longer sitting in classrooms with kids. So now the educators are not only worried about how their kids are going to eat and how they're going to learn, they're wondering how they're going to get the resources that they were already giving to them, like in the classroom. So given that this was really the foundation for the way that First Book operates, it called for a very immediate shift. So one of the first things that First Book did, which I thought was fantastic, was reach out to the network and say, hey, who can still get things? Who can still get books? Who can still get resources to kids? We know you're not in the classroom. And we basically created this map of around 7,500 educators all over the country who were doing things like delivering books, going to kids' houses and delivering books to them, standing in front of libraries and saying, come get these books. They were going to food pantries and distributing books while food was being distributed. Whatever they could possibly do to get resources to kids is what they did. And so our goal for COVID was to get 8 million books out to kids. That was our goal. We need to get 8 million books out. I think to date, we're probably about 7.5 million. So we're still pushing the books out. Kids are still, some are at home, some are in school. So we really had to recognize that the needs were different, right? So we did research. We talked to around 2,500 of our educators, found out technology was a big problem. 40% of kids in need don't have the technology they need. So how in the heck is remote learning supposed to happen? So we did partnerships in order to get 17,000 devices out to educators.
You're referring to like iPads or notebooks, right?
Notebooks, laptops, and Chromebooks. So we partnered with Intel, CDW, with the Lego Foundation, who got STEM resources out to communities. And so for us, I really, I appreciate, and I'm actually a little jealous of the ability to be able to directly, make those connections, because at times it felt like, trying to turn the Titanic to get all the parties in place in order to actually, make this thing happen. And then compounded with that, with the devices, was the fact that there's a shortage, because guess what? Everybody needs devices now.
Right.
So, we continue to get resources out to kids. We continue to work with partners who are absolutely awesome, many of whom just said, here's a check, do what you need to do so that the kids can be taken care of. And educators have truly, truly been heroes. I mean, if you could hear the stories that they've heard about what educators are doing in order to support and serve their kids, it is absolutely astounding. And if I didn't appreciate them before, which I did, just seeing what they've been able to do, it really elevates it and makes us recognize we know more the need continues to grow, the impact continues to grow. And so we're still looking for what's the new thing. How can we continue to actually serve and support the kids and the educators that we serve?
Josh, and before we open this up for other questions for all of us, just tell us, just for your perspective, how your organization, America Josh, founder of America Josh, had specific challenges for the expatriate community living in New York City under conditions of a pandemic.
Yeah, I think one theme that we've heard a lot tonight is people calling on networks. So it's, if you need some support, you go to your networks, you go to the people you know, you go to your family, you go to your friends. And I think what we really realized was that the people that have moved normally have those networks that they can go and reach out to, who might be in their home countries, and family members they can go visit. But that all disappears immediately when suddenly, for example, to get back to Australia at the moment, for me, it's gone from a simple, flight and go see some family and come back, to a 2-week quarantine and a $12,000 flight and a $3,000 quarantine, and it's $20,000, like $30,000 for a family to get back. And people feel remote, they feel distant from everything that they know. So what we quickly realized was that people didn't want information about, it started off as a website about how to get a driver's license, and that's, all well and good. But now people are looking for that support network, the person they can call on, the person that can be there when they're having a down day, or that they do need the support like these other awesome panelists are talking about, and someone that they can reach out to. So my job changed from being a resource of information to being a friend and being a family member and someone that they can call on. And then on a very similar level to what Shelley and Eric were talking about, was connecting community members to each other. And we set up a buddy system early on and realized that people just wanted to know that there was someone down the street, or at least in the same country, because we expanded quickly out of New York City and realized there were people all over the country that just wanted to know that there was someone in the same type of position that they were. And they wanted to be able to call them and say, I've had a terrible day. Tell me about your day. And they're not really looking for anything more than that support network, looking for someone that they can talk to and get it off their chest. And so I think the realization throughout COVID was very much that people don't need much. They just need someone to listen. And I think that's been a lot of what we've found very quickly with trying to create that resource, create that community, and emulate what you'd have if you had a family member close by, if you had close friends that you might have left behind in your home country.
Let me ask all of you this question, and you've all touched on it indirectly, which is that what's unique about a pandemic is that the whole concept of trying to build community or create relationships is completely stymied by phrases like 6 feet apart, or social distancing, or sheltering at home. The very nature of the pandemic is, symbolic of just isolation. That's what it requires. Quarantine. Think of the terms of art that we have now, 9 months have been in our brains. Wearing a mask, right? How do you build connection when you're standing 6 feet apart from someone who's wearing a mask? It presents every conceivable challenge to what human beings need in order to feel what Josh said, be my family member. Right now, maybe it works over the phone or on Zoom, but I'm wondering whether each of you in some way, or how many, want to discuss this obstacle. This is an incredible impediment to the thing. Now, I guess you'd say, well, but that's what we're trying to address. It's true, but there's something so particularly unique because you're supposed to stay away from each other by definition. So I wonder if it's an existential question here, and FOLCS always asks the big question, so here you go.
I think from my perspective at least, there was a real realization that being at an event isn't just about, the location, it's the proximity to people. It's literally being in the same room and being able to communicate on that kind of way. And, Shelley, for example, you'd go to a room and you could say, oh, I need this thing. And suddenly, especially during COVID, you don't have the opportunity to have that room of people to hear all at once, and you're suddenly speaking to a void. And I think the job, we all talk about Zoom fatigue and making sure that we're keeping things exciting. Like, just before we started this, you were talking about making sure that it's a conversation. It's not meant to be one-sided. It's meant to be communicative. It's meant to be back and forth. And that's been the difficult bit really to emulate, because I think we all want to try and do that, but it's tough when you've got a screen in front of you or a mask in front of you, or 6 feet apart. So it's been tough, but I think there are ways that we've adapted, and we've all sort of come to realize this is life now. And I think it sort of showed how resilient people are. If they really want it, they will get there, and people like these panelists will facilitate that.
Anyone else want to talk about the face-to-face challenges because of the impediment of simply not being face-to-face?
I mean, I actually think that, there's an opportunity in what's been happening. I feel like people suddenly understand that because they can't connect on that physical level, how deeply meaningful connection is, not just to them, but more importantly to other people. So I'll share with you a very quick story. There was a woman in April, like late April, from Phoenix, Arizona. Her first name is Denise, who wrote in one of our forms. And the form, if you go to it, the Get Help form, it just has check marks for like, what do you need? Groceries, electricity, phone bill, transportation, etc. And she actually checked the other. And then she wrote, I financially don't need anything, but I've realized just how alone I am, and that I have nobody, like nobody's calling to check in on me. I see all these beautiful stories that are coming out online. And she actually, in her words, sounded mentally unstable, led me to really, be concerned about her in a very different way. And so I wound up reaching out to her and asking her, how are you? What do you need? And, that was incredibly moving to her, that a human being that doesn't know her would actually have read her form and cared about her. And so what our organization proceeded to do, our volunteers, was we created, unbeknownst to her until we handed it to her, an inbox through Gmail. We just created, it was called loveletters4denise@gmail.com. And we basically asked any of our donors, but also the people that were recipients who don't have money to give, to just send an email and tell Denise how wonderful she is and how much she matters as a human being and why she's important. And since then, we've done that, over and over and over again for different people. But I think, to me, like, I don't look at it as a challenge. I actually say, like, yes, it is challenging, but it's also an opportunity to rise above that and to show that the human spirit, I think, can really, get beyond that obstacle, because just the connection of the heart is much stronger than, the connection, the physical connection.
It has that also incredible, delicious irony that, when we think of checking off a box that says other, we know what that means. That's the ultimate in innocuous, impersonal gesture, right? To other someone else means I'm othering you. And yet in your case, the other actually was a sign of distress that created love letters to Denise. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, I'm also a novelist, so I can't resist that. That was just really just incredible. Eric, Keisha, I have, you can answer that as well, but I thought I wanted to introduce another question for the two of you, and you could respond to that as well as this other, which is that in both of your cases, restaurants and schools, in preparing for this conversation, it made me realize, I never really realized until the pandemic how important restaurants are to socialization. Forget the food. Food is important. We want people like Eric who are talented, chefs. But he would probably say, I'm sure he can say, yes, Thane, of course, well, hello, yes, exactly. Decor, how the presentation, the way people feel when they walk in. People spend 3 hours in a restaurant. Think about, the importance of restaurants to socialization, to being part of communities and cities. And similarly for school, right? Parents are not in the position of being teachers or supervisors for their kids during the day. And it's important for kids, that's one of the reasons people are always concerned about homeschool, because they're afraid their kid won't be socialized, right? That's the concern. So the pandemic has forced us to really confront this absence of socialization. And I think it also has provided a newfound appreciation, at least for me, to think about, God, it's just so much beyond the delivery of information at school or delivery of a nice meal at a restaurant. It's beyond that. I wonder if the two of you can speak to that.
Yeah, so I can speak to it, of course, from the perspective of the school. So, one of the biggest challenges, it's interesting that you said that, because one of the biggest challenges that we found in our research from educators as they were looking at, their biggest issues as a result of the pandemic was not about learning. I mean, learning was a thing, but it was about mental health. I mean, that was really the thing, the isolation that kids have. They are used to being in school and talking to their friends every day. And all of a sudden they can't do that. And they are stuck at home with their families and their parents, which is problematic, not just from a learning perspective, but from a social and emotional perspective. So it is a key source. We have found that a lot of educators, a lot of teachers are doing creative things, and they're trying to learn, they have to learn the technology. They're learning, like, how to use Zoom. How do I use Zoom and control my class? And in addition to that, they actually also have to engage the class when they're not getting anything back from the other side half the time. Because
is there any anecdotal evidence that, in fact, although substandard, there is socialization through Zoom? That, in fact, it's not nothing. There is value to even teaching a class in that context where everyone's face is on the screen? Well, I should tell you, one of the events that we did, I was just remembering the dean at Georgetown Law School. We did an event, and he said, as a professor in the small seminars, he thought that the Zoom model where all the faces on the screen actually provided an opportunity that he doesn't get in the live seminars. He didn't say it was better, he just said it's different and it's got value. I'm curious that what teachers are explaining or what students are saying, that they still feel like they're hanging out in some way.
We have not found that in our research. Now, that's not to say, there is a big training portion here, right? The teachers have to understand how to do it. The kids have to understand how to do it. We're about 2 to 2.5 months in, depending on when school started. So they're figuring it out now. We'll be doing some additional research, but that is not, I would love to be able to say, oh yeah, it's working.
That's working.
The educators that I have spoken to have not found it. They have actually found that they are much more tired at the end of the day just because they have to work a lot harder to get that energy, which is kind of interesting. But the other thing I have to throw out there is remember that there are some kids who don't have computers. So they are even more isolated. So we are looking for new ideas for how to get them connected, with their classmates in a way that is safe. So I wish I had like really great and wonderful news there. I will say we have been able to do some kind of fun things with virtual readings. We had a reading about 2 weeks ago with, I don't know if any of you know kids' books at all, but there's a children's book called Ada Revere Engineer. It's very cute. The author read to about 300 or 400 classrooms online. She was wonderful, delightful, and the students were able to ask and get questions answered. And it was a great event. They loved it. They did feel connected. And that's the kind of thing they wouldn't have had access to because she can't go to 400 classrooms.
Right.
But she can sit here and talk all about, her book and what she's doing. So, in that way, there are some really positive opportunities that might not have otherwise come to fruition.
So Eric, the way you described the model of Power of 10, it made me think, well, yeah, you've got the restaurant that has financial concerns and you have people who have needs to eat. But I'm assuming in all the restaurants that you've developed over the years, that there are people who would say, Eric, I love your food, man, but I really need to show up at your restaurant twice a week, right? I'm sure you would say, Thane, I have a lot of people that they just come and I see them on Tuesday nights. They're always there on a Tuesday night. And I wonder if you can actually speak to that, whether people have literally said to you, yeah, I missed your food, but I missed something else even more.
I think that right now I have 4 restaurants. And I think you get so deep into just the minutia of running your business. I think the pandemic really was kind of remembered why I loved to do this in the first place, was to feed people and to make people happy through food. And we're not able to do it, really for the most part in the main dining room, but to have people continue to support us in different ways and to reconnect with our regulars and new customers and still be able to build customers and to have that kind of grind of, it's almost like opening my businesses all over again and remembering why you love it. And in regards to the nonprofit, is just really just this need to make sure that where I live and the people that are around me are intact, and have what they need. I think like what, with Keisha and even when I think about schools, specifically in the District of Columbia, obviously the pandemic is really tough, but this is the first time I've seen, I have two kids that go to public school, where every student has finally gotten resources. And maybe it's tough for them to learn now. But, before, I think it would be unthinkable to think that a school would give out a tablet or a computer to every kid that needed it and completely upload it with all types of learning materials and games and stuff like that, where, that would have never happened if this pandemic never happened. And I think that's just fact. And it is very challenging for, in DC public schools. I would say most of the parents still have to work, can't work from home. And because of that, they need to stay home and monitor their children's schooling, and therefore not able to make income, which then exasperates their need for food. And it's just this really tough cycle. But, to be able to find things in there that's like, hey, teachers are getting resources and schools are getting resources and that they wouldn't have gotten before. You can find these little bonuses from something that's just really tough on everybody.
Please reassure me, because I know there are a lot of people watching this around the country. They think of cities like New York or DC, where there is a restaurant culture, right? It's not just the food. There's a culture of restaurants. That when this is over, that will still exist. I mean, clearly, Power of 10 is designed to keep these businesses going. Everyone says, and you can all of you join in on this, that, well, no matter when it returns, it'll never return to the way it was before. That we will always now have to adopt some of the new things that we've developed, even what Eric just said for schools, that some of that will always carry over. But the experience of these restaurants and the need to not just eat, but to be there, do you fear that we're going to lose some of that? I mean, it's clear that your role right now is to rescue all of them.
I can only do so much at so once. Now, there are millions of restaurant workers who aren't working. There are millions of, tens of thousands of small business restaurants that are closed. And you see, food lines in Dallas, Texas that are thousands long, full of cars. And there are easy solutions to resolve the people that need to work, the restaurants that need to make money, and the people that need to make food. And other people can put that together. And it's very straightforward. Instead of leaning on your unemployment, your limited amount of unemployment funds, you can use the dollars much differently to keep people employed and make it happen, and do it in a way that's safe. I think that it will be a long time before the restaurant industry recovers, and sure, it might be different, but I think restaurants will be a lot cleaner. I think people will be a lot more sanitary. And I think that there'll be a development of a lot of really good habits of, I'm Chinese, we've been wearing face masks forever. And it's just normal part of those, and I think people are going to have more self-awareness of their behavior and how it impacts other people, which you see in a lot of other cultures, not necessarily, an American thing. And I think that those things are going to happen out of this.
Josh, our resident expatriate, who's actually a hero because he's an expatriate. What can you tell our audience our audience also is global, so I have no idea. We'll find out later who's really been watching. Sometimes we had an event recently, someone asked a question from Turkey. But what have you, because of the unique nature of your organization, what can you tell us about what you've learned about America in a time of pandemic?
I think
you've been away from home, and so you've been here observing us, and your communities, your whole community's observing us. Tell us something we might not know. How have we done? How have we conducted ourselves? Have we been in crisis?
Tough question. I think to start, to answer the question you were talking to Eric about, and the idea, what will we learn from this and restaurant culture and things, I'd like to think, and this sort of goes into your question to me, is that we won't take things for granted. I think going to a restaurant, that culture will come back, and it will come back strong, because when you go out for dinner to a restaurant, or whether you go to school, or whether you're just seeing friends, or, it's no longer something you just do because you do it and it's Friday night and you pick a restaurant and you go. It's very much about actively being there, and the opportunity that you've been given to be there, and the fact that you can afford it, and the fact that you're allowed to go outside without a mask and see friends. I think in general, the US numbers aren't great, and comparing it, my home state had I think 3 cases popped up yesterday. It's 3 in the state, and the whole state shut down again. So it's been a very sort of polarizing difference when we look at how different countries have reacted. But one of the things that I always talked about when moving, especially to New York City, was New York has a reputation of being cold and people not having time for each other, and very much, it's about business and it's about hustle. And I always was of the opinion that that's not necessarily the case. I said, if you get in the way of a New York City commuter on their commute, and they're, already 5 minutes late because the trains never run on time, you're going to get a reaction that's not going to be extra positive. But if you get them on a Friday afternoon when work's closing down and you're with friends, they're a fantastically supportive community. And I think we've seen that come in full circle, and seen it boosted by all of this, because I think we've seen people dig deep when others are in need. And that's been, hearing these stories about how reaching out to community members and saying, do you have something to give? And the fact that, Shelley's organization didn't just see a whole bunch of people asking for things, it equally saw a whole bunch of people come on and say, I've got things to give, it's really reassuring. And I've seen the same thing in our community. It's been that people aren't just asking for help. They're not just asking for sort of to get something. They're saying, what can I do? I had someone today reach out and say to me, I want to be the champion. We've got state champions, so we've picked people around the country who are the champion of their region. So if somebody has a query in that state, they can go to that person. And the amount of people that have reached out and said, I'd love to be that person, I want to be that beacon, I want to be that person that can be the resource, the local, boots on the ground, that's growing. It's becoming, more and more evident. And I think it's been really reassuring to know that people are out there that are willing to, give their time without necessarily getting anything back. And what you get back is the fact that you've helped someone, and there's someone out there that has benefited from this. And you can, honestly, you do get it sounds kind of lame, but you do get a warm and fuzzy feeling from that.
So we've been at this for 9 months, and we heard just this week, isn't this perfect timing to talk to the 4 of you, that there is a looming vaccine. By the end of this year, it certainly won't cover even fewer than 10% of the population, but it looks like there's some light at the end of this. I wonder if the 4 of you can address this whole question about fatigue. 9 months of isolation, 9 months of the work that you're trying to do. Shelley will say, I'm sure that since she's 12 years old, that her arms are tired. When you run around with pails of water, you get tired. And when you hear stories about Denise, or where Josh hears stories about people who want to be the champions of their state, it's inspiring. But at the same time, there should be, you can imagine a fatigue could set in. Is the motivation for all of you still present? The people that work with you, do you sense that you're losing the attention of some of them? Did the news of the vaccines change the calculus for you? Did it make it seem like, okay, now we can really charge this up because there's really super news? I wonder if some of you can address that. Shelley?
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to jump into that. So, as a mindfulness teacher that works in communities affected by gun violence and mass shootings, and in places like refugee camps, in places like Gaza Strip, for example, I have trained for a really long time in something called compassion-based resilience training, which essentially is a self-care practice that helps to build resilience and really makes a distinction between compassion and empathy. They're two very, related but different things. If you are in empathy mode for too long, then yes, you're at risk for extreme burnout. But as somebody who is can be empathetic, but actually practices with compassion, it's a lot easier to run the marathon and not, lose your steam. What's happened for us in our organization is that we've had to pivot as the needs have changed. Where we started in March when people were asking for things like groceries, we're now into a rent relief fund that is actually, our donors are private family offices that don't care if they get a write-off or not. And we're paying, hundreds of thousands of dollars in rent relief for families that meet specific criteria in different states where there are no moratoriums or other types of assistance available for them to help keep them in their homes. So the needs have changed, and I don't see that a vaccine is going to solve a lot of the needs and the problems that exist. I mean, there are people that have lost, we have a funeral fund. We've paid for, I can't even tell you how many funerals we've paid for, tens of thousands of funerals. And we are assisting families that a parent's life has been lost due to COVID-19. So that, the issues that stem from that are not going to go away just because a vaccine pops up. So I think it's going to take many years for us to really address the trauma and to culturally be able to actually heal from everything going on in this country, from the political, from the socioeconomic, from the racial, etc. There's just so many issues that we really need to address. But I think that it really all stems from having a coping plan as an activist or a volunteer, having a community of care that can help you enact that and hold you accountable to make sure you don't skimp yourself. And making sure that that you stay heart-centered, and that's really what's kind of kept me in the game and kept my fire burning, so to speak.
Excellent. Anyone else?
Yeah, I just want to add on to what Shelley is saying, because this whole question about trauma and resilience is one that we're really exploring, because we again know that the children who are in these communities where parents and teachers have been really sick or have died are experiencing trauma. We have teachers and caregivers and daycare providers who also need to be able to take care of their own social and emotional well-being while also managing that and supporting that for their kids. So this is just an interesting thing, listening to Shelley, because it is very pervasive. And it may be, I wonder if it's one of those things that may truly become even more apparent once the vaccine comes to bear. You know how you get that point when the stress has been relieved and then the symptoms actually really show themselves. So we're working with an organization called On Our Sleeves, which focuses on mental health in kids from age 0 to 18, so children. And looking at providing resources to help educators to support the mental health and resilience of the children that they serve. So very, very much in the same vein as what Shelley's saying.
Eric, Josh, do you have anything to add to that? Or we've got some questions from the audience I want to take, and we'll say goodnight. Do you want to add something to that last question I asked? The 9 months of fatigue compared to the news of a vaccine, and how the long-term effects this will take in responding to what we've learned and what we can walk away with?
I think that as many states go into the holidays, I think the fact that there was fatigue in regards to how people needed to carry their daily selves is where we are now, as many states are shutting back down, and the discussion about closing schools across the country, and do we go virtual for the next semester, and for the hospitality industry specifically, or anybody in the service industry that's still going to work and interacting with people, there's that fear every day that you're going to get sick and potentially, might lose your life just because you need to work.
Can I just interrupt for a second? Did you actually lose anyone in your 4 restaurants?
We just reopened last week. We had a staff member test positive. We closed for a period of time. And that's like my greatest fear is, that someone that works for me gets sick and passes away, and for what? For what? But at the same time, there's no other resources available except to work. So what choices do you really have? And I think because of this kind of rush, or to try to get things back to normal as possible, and not doing it seriously enough the first time, as many people predicted, we are where we are today. And hopefully I feel like maybe we'll learn our lessons moving forward, but I don't really think we have. We've learned a lot about how the virus works. We've learned a lot about what does and doesn't work. We've learned a lot about amazing people on this panel, what they can do to help and support people. But we were still waiting to see, and I think there's no real right answer of how do we carry on with what's going on.
Josh, before I take a question from the audience, I'm curious, did we lose an expatriate that was in your community that you were in contact with?
Luckily, no community members, but a lot of family members associated with the community. And I think that was one of the really upsetting parts of, sort of specific to that community, is the fact that you can't go back and be with your family, and you can't be there for people. And I think that sort of learning from all this, I'd like to think that one of the things we can take from it is priorities. And like Eric said before, why would I put myself in harm's way? What are we actually doing this for? And it's making sure that you're assessing, what is important day to day, and what is important. Family's important, friends are important, community's important, but are some of these other things that we may have valued quite highly as important as we thought they were? Or hopefully we take from this that we have some important things. Your health is a priority, which I think most people have reassessed and put right to the top of that list.
One of the audience members asks this question. It's similar to what Josh was describing and Eric. Are we learning throughout this pandemic about anything we might be missing in our society? Something that we might take away from this time and implement it when the world returns to normal?
I think for me to adapt on that, just what I was saying, I think it's really that we're not prepared for it. Like I think all these resources are fantastic, but the fact that we've so quickly needed so much support shows just how sort of teetering on the edge so many of our community members are, which I'd like to think that we come out of this and realize that there are some people in need, and they'll be in need post-vaccine too. So hopefully we reassess for them and say, we've got community members that we need to support all the time, not just in times of global pandemic.
An interesting point, right, Josh? I hadn't thought about it. We really were not prepared for this. This is just, this is not 1917 with the Spanish flu. This is something that really I think people didn't know if they should take it seriously. Remember when news first started coming out in January and February? It's really, when you look back on it, nobody really saw this coming at all.
I think, the fact that we saw, unemployment go so high so quickly, and we saw so many people reaching out to food banks and resources that exist on this panel, like we're talking days after it really became an issue in the major cities around the US and the world. It's not just the US. It showed just how where we don't have the capacity for anything to go wrong. It relies, a lot of these people, a lot of the people around the world have to, work day to day just to get to the next day, and they have to, hustle for every single thing. It's not about sort of big picture things. It's very much about putting food on the table. And we saw quickly that is how close we are to everything falling apart, which it's, for me, it was an eye-opener. You assume that more people will be able to sort of sustain themselves for longer, but the simple fact is they can't. And that's not against them, that's against, just the setup, the community that we unfortunately live in.
Anyone else? I'm going to ask another question, but anyone else want to respond to that?
Yeah, I just want to jump in there and say that I think for me, what it reaffirmed for me was how important and how far away we've gotten from really being communal. The it takes a village mentality. So, your parents, my grandparents would have defined it as back in the day, right? Like back in the day when we were younger and Judy got sick next door, somebody would come over with chicken soup. And if Bob lost his job, we would, make sure that there was food on the table for his kids. And it's like, we all took care of each other. We really, really knew what was going on with our community, with our neighbors. And I think that, what we've learned, or what I've learned, is that it's so important to get back to that, to build those safety nets on micro community levels, because those safety nets are what is going to create equity, true equity in this world, and make sure that everybody has enough. And really our mantra as Pandemic of Love is that enough is a feast. And so if everybody has enough, that we're not asking for more than enough, just enough.
Before we say goodnight, this is the last question. We can frame it just as a sort of a plea. This woman or man, says anonymous attendee, thanks us, of course, for a very hopeful event. And I love the fact that she used the word hopeful. But she also, I think, is asking about the four of you, have you, in all the time that you spent, have you had personal moments of doubt, frustration? Doesn't mean that you stopped, but just caused you to have a moment of, despair. Again, we want to think of this as we're at the end of this experience. But this person wonders, I guess in her own way, she's just thanking you for having, stayed the course. So, I want to say goodnight to our audience and to all of you, and thank you. We have, we have ongoing events here, so please, for those of you who are following folks.org, go to the website, sign up. We've got all kinds of exciting events coming up throughout the winter, and we need them because, as the pandemic has needed more reasons for content, and we have really taken the position that we wanted to produce really high-level content in the spirit of folks. And tonight, no exception. It was really inspiring and wonderful and really heartwarming. You know what? We're a nonprofit too. Sherman, you could pop up the next screen. We haven't charged for any events throughout this pandemic. So you can always go to folks.org and donate. There's also I don't know, it's coming up soon, a text number. We want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. And really, I guess there are much to still be thankful for. I think this is one of those things about Thanksgiving that we, do we actually know how to celebrate the holiday? Maybe this year, more isolated, gives everyone a reason that there is reason to give thanks. I want to say to Keisha and Shelley and Eric and Josh, really thank you for really being so inspiring and yes, heroic. And thank you for your heart. Because one of the things that really came out here tonight was your hearts. It's not only in the right place, but it's active and it's real and it's truly beating. So we want to thank you all for that. So good night to everyone. Thane Rosenbaum from Folks. We'll see you later. Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Nice meeting you.
Bye. Thank you.